What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another edition of Touchline Talk. Boy, a lot happened this weekend. We're not even going to talk about the fact that Seattle just gave up a second goal to Chicago and is in some trouble in the MLS's back tournament. I, I guess I'll mention it briefly. I'm still very high on the Seattle team. The question is whether they can just get through the group stage and maybe they're able to get a very late equalizer here. They have not looked good, but can you get through the group stage? Can you get some momentum going? They are notoriously slow starters. It's been the case again in this tournament. That's the question. I'm not giving up hope on them, but it has not been impressive for them so far. If something happens in that game, we'll let you know. They're still playing down in Orlando. Other thing I want to mention to MLS before we get to our first five, it it could have gotten really bad when Sporting Kansas City has a positive test and you have this mess with Toronto and DC where both players have a test they're not sure of the results. DC is willing to play, shows up. Toronto it is on a Zoom call and refuses to go to the stadium to play because they're not comfortable with the situation. Major League Soccer then goes and postpones the game, which was the right thing to do. But you still have an issue because Toronto decided by themselves they weren't going to play, which is understandable. And eventually the test came back negative. It seems like MLS got over that hurdle, but it's just another reminder with any sport, any teams, any leagues trying to come back, whether it's MLS or Major League Baseball or NBA or anything else. Step one is getting into the bubble and getting any of the positive tests out of the way and isolated so that when you're in your bubble, you know that the people you're interacting with didn't test positive from interactions outside of the bubble. Step two is then can you keep it insulated? Can you prevent an outbreak because you're going to have positive tests? Can you figure out how to operate in a world where you always run the risk of having somebody who hasn't gotten test results back then going and playing against other people. So MLS got through it. It was not perfectly handled. They got to figure out how to get teams on the same page with this thing and understand and just come to an agreement on what's going to happen when you have these situations because it's probably going to happen again. But there was real danger that this tournament was going to go in a direction that could lead to it being shut down. I think it was that serious, but thankfully tests were negative. It seems like it's going on as planned and things are going to be okay, but it's just another reminder of how dangerous this is and how thin ice all of these comeback attempts are on. It can change in an instant, and it's not just about getting into the bubble. It's about then getting that bubble to be as safe as possible and handling the positive tests that are going to come. All right, without further ado, we're going to get into our first five because so much has happened. Just utter chaos. So we're going to break this down into three parts from the Premier League perspective. We're going to call it Premier League Chaos Parts 1, 2, and 3. So part 1 is Chelsea. Chelsea enters the weekend, third place in the league, recovered from that shocking loss to West Ham, looked like things were going to be okay. They go play Sheffield United. Chelsea has 76% of possession and loses 3-0. It's the largest margin of defeat for a team with that much possession since there's reliable and complete possession data dating back to 2003-2004. So basically this has not happened before since we've been keeping track of possession. But then because of everything that's happened afterward that we're going to get to in a second, Chelsea's still in the top four by a point. They're still in third by a point. So they got bailed out because nobody else took advantage of this slip-up. But my goodness, it was not a good performance, and particularly defensively, it was a mess. And it shows, that possession was not particularly dangerous. Sheffield United had the better chances and put them away. And this is a perfect example of why possession can be so deceiving. Chelsea was not the better team by any stretch of the imagination. And it had a lot to do with individual and collective defensive mistakes of just not being good enough at the back. And that's the story of this team right now and the situation Frank Lampard finds himself in. I love what this team is doing. I love what they look like up front with Ziyech coming in and Werner coming in and potentially a Kai Havertz. Or Declan Rice has also been linked. Whoever else you're going to bring into that attacking part of the field and the midfield. I love what they're doing. But you are not competing with Liverpool and Manchester City until you fix this defense. And yes, of course, the simplest solution is obviously just throw a bunch of money at a Nathan Ake or somebody like that. Go get a center back. Go get Ben Chilwell. But there's also not guaranteed that that's going to be able to happen. Who knows what kind of money Chelsea has left with all these attacking players they're bringing in. And who knows, if Chelsea ends up not in the Champions League and Leicester ends up in the Champions League, maybe Ben Chilwell doesn't want to leave. Maybe Nathan Ake ends up in Manchester City. There are a lot of unpredictable things, especially in this kind of transfer market with the uncertainty of COVID and what it's going to do financially. So the other point I want to bring up here is that I understand Frank Lampard is working within the constraints of his roster and he had a transfer ban when he came in. But you still have the best center defensive midfielder in the world on your team. And I know Conte didn't play in this game, but since Lampard has been there and since Mauricio Sarri, which is a different situation because he wants Jorginho playing at the base of his midfield because he just wants Jorginho there. That's just how it's going to be. But when Frank Lampard comes in and, he's clearly not as big of a fan of Jorginho as Sarri is, why not put N'Golo Kante at right in front of your back four and just stick him there? Let him do what he did for Leicester. He is the best in the world at that. Just breaking up passes, making tackles, turning people over, just making it hard to get at your defense. But instead, throughout his Chelsea career, in particular the last few seasons, he's been playing on the right of this midfield three. And he's just not anywhere near as effective. And you've got these defensive issues that keep popping up. This is not a new thing. It wasn't particularly surprising what happened against Sheffield. It was surprising in the sense that they've been playing much better. But they have been suspect to these kind of defensive performances all season. They have been inconsistent. And the other part of this is not only is Conte being used out of place and could probably, at least as a temporary solution, help this. But when you decide to play four at the back, you're taking Marcos Alonso out of what he does best. He cannot play as a left back. You saw that last Yarmolenko's goal in the West Ham game, the winner. That was exclusively because Marcos Alonso was playing left back and he's not going to defend. Frank Lampard decided he's going to come in and play a 4-3-3, which by all means go say this is how we're playing, this is the system I want to implement. But this is the price you pay when you have pieces that you're working with right now. Maybe clearly he wants to move on from Alonso. He wants to just get rid of all the guys playing left back right now and go get somebody to fill that void. But when you choose to play that way, you're taking some of your better options. I love Alonso. I think he is sensational. Of course, in a specific role where he's playing left wing back and he has three central defenders to cover him. And I'm a massive fan of N'Golo Kante. But he's just not as effective playing on the right in a midfield three. Frank Lampard is making choices, and what you saw in this game is that this team is still young, this team is still inconsistent, and this team has defensive issues that they're not trying to proactively solve on a temporary basis using the resources at his disposal. He's choosing to play a particular way, and Sheffield United came in, all of a sudden turned things around because I really thought they were dead and buried in the race for Europe after their poor beginning to this restart. But they have really turned things around. David McGoldrick is scoring goals, which is an added bonus because he's there to do just about everything else except score goals. Now he's scoring goals. It was just a rough performance from Chelsea, deserving losers, and it's just the reality of the situation. Another reminder. You got to be able to defend consistently at a high level if you're going to compete for the very, very top of this league. They can make the top four. They're probably one of the best four teams in the Premier League right now, and they definitely will be next year. But it's that question of, are you third or fourth, or are you competing to be top two, competing to win the league? And Chelsea's got to figure out what's going on with defense in order to take that next step. So we go from Chelsea, and next up in our competition to see who gets into the Champions League is Leicester City. Leicester City can move back into third with a win against Bournemouth. Bournemouth is absolutely atrocious in the first half. Can't hold the ball in midfield to save their lives, turning it over left and right. Jamie Vardy gets 1 goal. Nathan Ake has to sacrifice himself to the point where he may not play in a Bournemouth jersey again to stop Vardy from scoring a second. He injured his thigh and it didn't look good. He had to slide across to deflect the ball. It was a great defensive play, and I am a huge fan of Ake. He needs to go play at a better club. But that's the price they had to pay to even stay in the game. And then you get to halftime. And all of a sudden, just strange things start happening. Kasper Schmeichel kicks the ball off of Wilfred Ndidi's back from a goal kick. Ndidi then commits a penalty trying to recover on defense. Bournemouth convert the penalty. Then Dominic Solanke comes in. This is his 60th Premier League appearance. Coming into this game, his first 59 games, he had 1 goal. It was in a season finale for Liverpool that I believe just didn't matter from a standing standpoint, which is why he was playing. And he scores. And then after he scores, Kagler Sionchu decides he's going to go kick out at Callum Wilson in the net in the little scuffle that ensued afterward. And so he gets a red card. So now Leicester's down a goal and a man. Solanke scores again, Junior Stanisland scores again, and Bournemouth wins 4-1. Yes, I understand that Leicester doesn't have Ben Chilwell, doesn't have Ricardo Pereira, who's the much bigger loss, and doesn't have James Maddison, their creative force. And I just don't care. In a game like this, they were in complete control, and they just threw it away. I have never seen anything quite like this. From Kasper Schmeichel's perspective, you're the captain, you're a Premier League winner. You just got to know better than to kick the ball off of Wilfred Ndidi's back. You got to have better awareness, and he said as much after the game. And then we get to Sionchu. I have never been as high on Sionchu as most other people. This idea that, Manchester City is interested in him and Real Madrid is interested in him. And to be fair, he has proved me wrong this season. I thought Leicester needed to go get another center back to pair with Johnny Evans. I was not sold on the idea he could step in. And he has definitely proven that he is more than capable of stepping in. And I understand that Leicester is not going to find a better center back. At least in a replacement situation. Maybe they, find one somewhere in your academy or something. But that you're not looking at him saying Leicester needs something better at center back is my point. But at the same time, he has these moments where you just wonder what he's doing. He makes rash, careless challenges in the box sometimes, has gotten called for penalties on multiple occasions because of it, and then he does something like this. It was just a careless, stupid red card. And now he's done for the year. Leicester needs to go figure out how to retool this back, which now they have, in theory, 3 of their 4 starters out. It's a mess, and if you are going to go compete to win, to make the Champions League, to get into the top 4, this cannot happen. I don't want to hear about the injuries, the fact that they've been bad off the restart, and it's this long stretch of poor form. I don't want to hear about any of that, because this race is going to go down to the wire. Because nobody else is taking advantage of Leicester's continued struggles, which means that these 3 points could come back to be the difference. And if they are, and Leicester misses out on the Champions League by a point or 2 points or something, they got nobody else but themselves to blame. That was just a horrific 45 minutes. That if you want to be playing at this level, if you want to play with the big boys, you want to compete with Chelsea and Manchester United, you just have to find a way to close that game out. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You got to take care of business. And maybe you give up an equalizer or something because Bournemouth was starting to play better. But you can't self-destruct like that. It's going to cost you, and I have very little sympathy from an injury standpoint. That wasn't an injury. That was just a lack of mental toughness and determination on Leicester's part. On the Bournemouth side, not only 3 points behind Watford, 3 points from safety. They got to go play Manchester City next, so I don't think this is going to happen. But it was a very positive, inspiring performance for Eddie Howe to find a way to get that kind of second half out of his team after they were just lifeless in the first half. It says something about what he can do as a manager and the talent this team still has. And the other point I want to make here is, at halftime, the NBCSN guys who are fantastic were pointing out on Vardy's goal that you had both your right back Jack Stacey and your left back Diego Rico nowhere in the picture, bolting up the field when Bournemouth can't defend. And part of what they were saying is, right, Jack Stacey's running right next to Eddie Howe. Eddie Howe needs to tell him to stay back. And yes, ideally you have better situational and spatial awareness from your fullbacks. But I want to propose a counter, and I don't actually disagree with that assessment that Eddie Howe needs to get his team organized better. But the problem with Bournemouth this season is not that they've been bad defensively. They've always been bad defensively. It's that they're not scoring goals like they used to. They're not having halves like they had in the second half where they're just lighting teams up. Because they've been able to do that under Howe. It's how they've stayed in the Premier League. If you're not scoring goals, you need 3 points consistently through these last 3-4 games to have a chance of staying up. So the idea of sending your fullbacks into the attack with reckless abandon isn't irrational to me, because you've got to find a way to score goals. Keeping it tight and then hoping you nick one at the end isn't going to cut it. You can't get draws to get safe at this point because everybody's winning around you now. Watford's putting together a nice string. West Ham's basically run away from the pack. You've got some things happening at the bottom. Teams are not just consistently losing anymore. So I'm not putting Eddie Howe at as much fault for that first half as the NBCSN guys were. I sort of understand the thought process there, and maybe he wasn't thinking that way. Maybe he wanted to play more defensively, but it's not in his DNA, so I find it sort of hard to believe. But I did want to offer that defense to him, that I kind of get it. You got to score goals at this point if you're Bournemouth. So Chelsea lose, Leicester lose in catastrophic fashion. And then we get to Monday in Manchester. The day begins with the announcement that Manchester City is no longer banned from the Champions League, that they have won their appeal, at least to a certain extent. And so now you're competing for 4 Champions League spots, because we've been qualifying it from the beginning with that 5th placing if Manchester City is banned. Manchester City is no longer banned. Basically, what the Court of Arbitration for Sport, CAS, ruled was that Manchester City is still getting fined, although it's a reduced fine, for impeding and not cooperating with the investigation. But that the charge itself, that basically they had falsified or exaggerated the amount of sponsorship money, is the most simplistic way to put it, that they were bringing in. That the accusations were a combination of, out of the timeline that UEFA is able to look at, it's only a 5-year window. You can't go back after 5 years, and this stuff is right. This is not from Pep Guardiola's time there. This is way before that, and so it was out of the timeline, and also that some of it was a combination of time and not being able to actually prove it. And so the important thing here, sort of moving forward for City's legacy and perception, is if we get more details, if these findings become public, was it because did this ruling get overturned because there was not enough evidence, or because the things that happened did actually happen but were outside the statute of limitations, those 5 years? That's the big question. Because if it's that UEFA wasn't able to prove it, you got questions about financial fair play, questions about UEFA, and City is more or less exonerated. But if this is just because it happened 6 years ago instead of 5, and UEFA dragged their feet or just wasn't able to make it happen, that changes City's perception from a legacy perspective and how they're viewed in the soccer community. What doesn't change, though, is how important this is for Manchester City moving forward. Kevin De Bruyne is 29, Sergio Aguero is 32, Riyad Mahrez is 29, Bernardo Silva turns 26 in August, Raheem Sterling's 25. Particularly De Bruyne, Mahrez, and Aguero, and especially De Bruyne, who I have said before and I continue to believe is clearly the best player on this team. Maybe not the most important, but he does things nobody else can. He has been public about the idea that he's not enthused. He was not enthused staying around for 2 years without Champions League. I am convinced he would have left. Bernardo Silva apparently seems to be in pretty much the same boat leading into this massive World Cup where he's going to be in his prime. Same thing kind of applies to Sterling, although there wasn't as much talk on his end. Right? Sergio Aguero's not sitting around waiting for 2 years to play in the Champions League. Riyad Mahrez left to go Leicester because he wanted this kind of opportunity to go play in the Champions League. These guys are not 22. They're not Phil Foden, who's just coming into his career and can sit there for 2 years at his boyhood club and wait it out. This changes an immense amount for City moving forward. Not only does it take the pressure off of we got to win this year or else we're not going to have a chance for 3 years, it keeps this project moving forward. It gives Pep Guardiola the same kind of confidence and ability to go spend and convince players to join that he's had that have made them this good in the first place. This is not they've done a great job of sort of building a team of guys in their prime. And that as Sergio Aguero moves out of his, Gabriel Jesus is there to become his replacement. And as David Silva leaves, Phil Foden is ready to step in for him. It's this cycle. But all of a sudden the danger of having guys in their prime is that they want to be in the Champions League. These are world-class talents, De Bruyne, Mahrez, Bernardo Silva. It's a hard sell to tell them, yeah, you can stay and compete for the Premier League, but you can't play in the Champions League for 2 years. Now all of a sudden that goes away. That City feels justified, like they didn't do anything wrong. And sort of on the managerial side, Arteta's come to Guardiola's defense more or less, and you've got Jose Mourinho and Jurgen Klopp being critical of UEFA and this decision and all, we're not exactly sure. It's still very confusing. But all I know is that Manchester City is now here to stay. I really think this could have tore the core of this team apart. The guys just weren't going to sit there for 2 years, and I don't blame them. You can argue whether that's... And the other thing is that nobody should be surprised that this got overturned. I mean, UEFA hasn't exactly been diligent in punishing people severely for financial fair play violations. That was sort of the thing at the beginning of this, is wow, they actually went after him. And Manchester City's going, why aren't you going after anybody else? Which is a flawed argument that I don't buy. If you broke the rules, you're putting yourself in a position to be punished based on that, regardless of what happens in other situations. But Manchester City's got to be feeling great. So you've got your top four now. Manchester City's going to be there next year. They've already clinched a Champions League spot. And then Manchester United gives up an early goal to Southampton. Pulls two back really quickly. Again, another one of those moments where I thought, is this going to fall apart? Is Manchester United going to revert back to old form? And you get a goal, and then Anthony Martial has a moment of brilliance for a second, and all of a sudden they're in control of the game. But Michael Omofemi slips in a very, very late equalizer. And so now, 3 games left. Manchester United is still not in the Champions League. Leicester's ahead of them on goal difference. And they still play each other, and this is the other fascinating thing. There's going to be another twist to this. There's no way this just stays. Chelsea plays home against Norwich today, at Liverpool, who still have everything to play for. We're going to talk about that at the end and what's next. And versus Wolves, who are in a Europa League battle. United have at Crystal Palace, home against West Ham, who are playing much better, and at Leicester. Leicester plays Sheffield United, who just thumped Chelsea, at Spurs, who just beat Arsenal, and Manchester United. There's something else is going to happen. Somebody else is going to slip up. There's going to be a couple draws in there. This is far from over. But basically, we just got a restart from 2 weeks ago when Chelsea jumped into third. Leicester gets saved from a catastrophic performance. They can regroup, and if they win their games, take care of business, they're playing the Champions League next year. And United, the one time they slip, they don't get punished for it. So if they go back to if they show up against Crystal Palace, they're going to be fine too, probably. It's just a reset button for everybody. 3 games. It's going to be a phenomenal finish. Very, very excited to see what happens there. All right, so real quick. We also had North London Derby this weekend. Spurs are now 2 points out of 7th with this win. It was a very Jose Mourinho performance. Not exactly inspiring, but it got the job done. So all of a sudden they could end up in Europa League, which gives them at least a pathway to potentially get back into the Champions League, gives you European competition. For as bad as the season has been, it's not a terrible spot to be considering the circumstances. But this is more about Arsenal. Again, a pretty good performance. It's not like they're playing poorly, but they're getting undone by individual mistakes at the back. It's the same thing with Chelsea, but even to a larger degree with guys like Mustafi and David Luiz. And then Kolasinac had a just horrid pass to David Luiz that turned him running inside and led to Son's equalizer because he didn't pass it to him. He passed him back into the center of the field where nobody was. It's the same thing with Chelsea. These teams are so good going forward. There's positive things. You've got to feel good about where they're going with their young managers. But you have got to clean this up at the back. Whether that's doing something different tactically or ideally bringing in new players. It's just not good enough. You can like Arsenal's attack all you want, but this is not going to change in any meaningful way until they are able to figure out how to not make these catastrophic errors at the back, how to be consistent, and just give their attack a chance to not have to score 2-3 goals every single game to get 3 points. You get some clean sheets, and then we can talk about getting back into the Champions League, competing for a Premier League title. Fifth and final thing in our first five, we also had a Champions League draw. I don't have all that much to say about this, but the one thing I do want to point out is that I love how this broke for Atalanta. First of all, we get a science experiment in the quarterfinals. They're going to play PSG. And I talked about this in my 5 things from the week on 110sportsmedia.com a couple weeks ago, but haven't mentioned it here yet. I'm just fascinated to see, right? We got 3 groups of teams. You got the teams in England, Italy, and Spain who've been playing through the mid to late July and are coming in ready to go Champions League-wise. You've got Leipzig and Bayern who played for a while and now have this extended break. And then you've got PSG who hasn't played since March in a competitive situation. Atalanta's in tremendous form. They just drew with Juventus and almost beat them. I'm fascinated to see if PSG, who is still the better team, obviously, can actually pull this out and flip the switch just like that and go beat these guys who are as good in attack as anybody in the world right now. And then if Atalanta can get past PSG and the idea that you're playing the one team who hasn't played competitive games in months, then you've got the winner of Atletico Madrid and Leipzig. Leipzig lost Timo Werner. Atletico Madrid has not been great this season. Yes, they beat Liverpool, but they also sort of had their moment of Champions League glory already. And they're really good in this tournament. Simeone knows what he's doing. It's not going to be easy. And I'm not even sure I would pick Atalanta to win. But you look at the bottom half of this bracket, it's Real Madrid, Man City, Juventus, Lyon, Barcelona, Napoli, and Bayern, Chelsea. So it's probably going to be Man City, Juve, Barca, and Bayern. Or maybe Napoli beats Barca or Lyon holds on against Juve or something. But the teams I'm most scared of are Bayern and City. And they're both in the bottom half. Atalanta could easily make a semifinal, make it to the final of this thing. Which is just an incredible thing to think about. That's what stood out to me. And of course you've got your potential Ronaldo-Messi matchup. But I would just love to see Bayern, Man City in the semis. Pep's old team versus Pep's new team. Bayern's probably the most informed team in the world. They've looked great since the restart. And, of course, you got the Leroy Sané thing. Not that he's obviously not going to play, but they just made a significant transaction. I would love to see that. It would be such high quality and just extremely, extremely entertaining to watch. So, UCL draw. So much has happened. That's our first 5. Absolute chaos in the Premier League. It was just hard to comprehend what I was watching at times this weekend. And every time you thought somebody's going to do something to stamp their place in the top 4 and really make a statement, something happens and they weren't able to do so. So 3 games, race to the finish. It's going to be great. All right. When we come back, winners and losers so far from the MLS's back tournament. Teams have played pretty much 1 game so far. Seattle's now at 2. But we've got some data, some analysis here to look at and start making assumptions about where these teams are, considering none of them have played for months. So that's where we're going next. You're watching Touchline Talk on 110 Sports. Welcome back to Touchline Talk. As promised, we are now here to talk all things MLS's back tournament. Very interesting results so far. This has been an incredibly fun tournament to watch again once you get past the fact that it looks like they're playing on a training field and that this is nowhere near, regular season MLS games. But it's the reality of the situation. League is doing the best it can, and we've got Major League Soccer to talk about, which is sensational. Our first winner, the Columbus Crew. This is not just because they absolutely hammered FC Cincinnati, put 4 goals past them. This is about how much better this team is going to be this season, how much better this team already looks. Now that Caleb Porter has had time to put things together, put his imprint on this team, and make it his own. This is a guy that's won an MLS Cup with the Portland Timbers. He knows what he's doing. And the midfield trio they now have of Artur Darlington Nagbe and Lucas Zelarayan, who scored an absolutely beautiful free kick and is the kind of guy that takes this team to the next level. It's one of the best in the league. It can be deceptive because this is the Columbus Crew. It's not a flashy team like an Atlanta United, an LAFC, a Seattle Sounders, an Inter Miami. They're not going to spend that kind of money. But they've got enough nice pieces. Then you go get your big-time difference maker like Zelarayan. You bring Darlington Nagbe back, who's very comfortable with Caleb Porter. Played for him not only professionally, but also in college. I absolutely love the makeup of this roster, what this team is doing. This is not just one good performance. This is one of the best teams in the league. And if they can keep this thing going, they are absolutely a threat to win this entire tournament, to make a run at MLS Cup if the season does continue afterward. This is back to the Columbus Crew being one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference and a perennial contender. They're never going to be LAFC. They're not going to make MLS Cup every year, but they have a very solid history. They have made MLS Cup before, obviously, in the near future, recent past. It was a rebuilding year last year. They kind of had to figure out what to do. Caleb Porter needed to get his feet under him. But this is absolutely the real deal. This team is going to be really good all season long. On the flip side, we have our loser, which is FC Cincinnati. I mean, geez. This team was never supposed to be good. But there was this idea that you get some new attacking players in there. Year 2, maybe they can be a little bit better defensively and at least be competent. You bring Jaap Stam in as your new coach after a very strange offseason. And yeah, he's got work to do. It was just ugly. There's not too much to say because they were just awful. And of course, they have time to turn this around. It's the beauty of a tournament like this. It's only one game. Other teams are losing too. But in this group, with these kind of teams, it's an incredibly difficult ask for them to finish anything less than 4th and to even maybe get a point with what Atlanta United still offers, with what the Red Bulls have already shown and consistently show throughout their history. It's tough for Cincinnati. I mean, any hope that things were going to turn around quickly, and Minnesota United is a testament to this. It's not that you can't figure this out over time, and if you're bad at the beginning of your introduction into this league, you're always going to be bad. Minnesota United hasn't lost yet this year. But it took a couple rough years of them just sort of figuring it out, putting players on the field until they were able to really build an identity and figure out who they want it to be. So it's going to be a long process for Cincinnati. Winner number 2, DC United. This was one of the more surprising results so far. Not that DC got a draw against Toronto, but that Toronto gets 2 first-half goals from Ayo Akinola, their stud homegrown player who's going to be in Europe very soon. Keep your eye on him. And then Junior Moreno gets sent off in stoppage time in the first half, so DC's playing the entire second half with 10 men. And then they score twice, super late on, the first one coming from Federico Higuain, who ironically was, a longtime member of the Columbus Crew, but he's in DC now, and he gets the first one. They sneak another one at the very, very end, and they get a draw. And this stat is courtesy of OptaJack. Think about this. They're the first MLS team to overcome a 2-goal deficit, playing with 10 men against 11, since 2007. In that span, teams in their situation, when they walked onto the field at the start of the second half, were 156-1. They pulled this thing out, and one team had only ever really done this before. And it's crucial to get that point, because now that New England, we're going to get to this in a minute, but now that New England beat Montreal and Toronto is going to be Toronto, you can't fall behind in this group, because I still think Montreal's going to have something to say and Toronto is still the best team in this group. So finding a way to at least get a point puts you in the conversation to at least get second or try and sneak into the knockout stage. And, of course, whenever you can steal a point from a standings perspective, because these do count for the regular season, when you're 2 goals down and down a man at halftime, obviously you're going to take that any day of the week. So a very nice response from DC United. It wasn't exactly ideal from start to finish, obviously, but very, very good for them to get this point and just sort of keep things afloat. Our second loser, Sporting Kansas City. And it's not because they gave up a late lead and lost to Minnesota United, as much as it is that for all the teams that have looked really poor so far, and specifically Seattle, who just lost to Chicago, that game went final, Sporting Kansas City looked really good. Maybe better than any other team save Columbus. Their new striker, Alan Pulido, was sensational. He has some Roberto Firmino-like qualities where he's just difficult to deal with, and he moves all over the place. They looked great. And then Tim Mealy gets a red card in the 74th minute. You're thinking, okay, Minnesota's starting to grow into the game. They're going to come. If you give up an equalizer, fine. But you give up a goal in the 92nd and 97th. So they held on for a while and then gave up 2 uber late ones. And again, it's part of also this group. Real Salt Lake already has 3 points. Minnesota now has 3 points, and I again am high on Colorado. You went from being perhaps the most convincing team in your group, and maybe RSL also put in a very comprehensive performance, but you had an opportunity to really build on. They were also undefeated coming in. They had 2 wins in their prior 2 games before COVID shut things down. They were looking really, really good, like your traditional SKC team, what you expect from Peter Vermees' side. And they just couldn't capitalize on a really good performance. And so now you've got to go do it again to have a hope of getting back into this group. All hope is not lost by any means. I was really impressed with the way they looked. They're a good team. Alan Pulido is the real deal. But specifically in terms of this tournament, that one might come back to bite you. And they were so close, and they could have had it. And if other teams start playing better and they have a poor performance, you look back on this and go, that was a really good one that we didn't capitalize on. So SKC is definitely a loser so far. Winner number 3, New England Revolution. That was a really, really good performance from Bruce Arena's team. 1-0 win over Montreal. You get a goal from Gustavo Bo. They have some talent. They're scrappy, tough to play against because Bruce Arena is their coach. We'll see if it lasts. But again, it's one of those situations for me where you got to be able to capitalize on a performance like that for sort of the reverse of what Sporting Kansas City was unable to do. New England saw this thing out, and so now you've got your 3 points in a group where Toronto's coming. DC is going to be difficult, and I still like Montreal. This is again one of those balanced, tough groups. So to get at the top, it not only pick up 3 points, but also have the other game end in a draw, so that you've got a 2-point edge right now. Absolutely great from New England. They got to feel really good. We'll see how long it goes. I'm still not sold they're actually going to get out of this group, that they could very easily lose their next 2. But you take 3 points at the beginning of a tournament all day long, and you just build from there, and they've got a good chance to make it to the knockout round now. Loser number 3, we mentioned this a little bit, Colorado Rapids. Nobody was hurt more by the COVID shutdown, I think, than the Rapids, just because they had so much momentum coming from the end of last season when they were awful and then almost snuck into the playoffs once Robin Fraser became their head coach. And then they looked really good at the beginning of this season. And then everything gets shut down, and you're in this tough spot where you go play RSL. You give up 2 goals. You also concede a penalty that was saved. And again, these groups are just so balanced, this one in particular, with RSL, who looks pretty good, and Kansas City, and Minnesota. You put yourself at a massive disadvantage with giving up multiple goals, just not playing well, because your other 2 games, Kansas City and Minnesota. You don't like Colorado's chances in either of those games. So this was a chance to make a statement, to come back with some confidence, say we've still got this momentum going, we're still playing well, and yeah, that didn't happen. So Colorado may have just sort of invited themselves out of the tournament with that one loss, because this is a really deep, challenging group. Our final winner, Portland Timbers. My goodness, was Sebastian Blanco good in this game. He was really good. And yes, they had to save a penalty. Then the Galaxy have 2 goals correctly called for offside that are pulled back. And Chicharito finally gets his MLS goal. This very, very easily could have been a draw. The Galaxy were not good for about 60 minutes and then really came on at the end of the game. But Portland held on. And again, in this kind of group where you got a 3-3 draw from Houston and LAFC, Portland's at the top. You've got 3 points. You don't want to play LAFC. So now you can afford to get a draw or take that loss, assuming you can take care of business against Houston. You're in a really good spot. And you get a goal from Jeremy Abobasi, who made a nice little run to sort of sneak in there and poke that thing through. which is one of the questions with this team is what are you going to do at striker? It seems like they're just never sold on him, but he showed up and played well. This is a team that if they get going, again, typically slow starters, but if they find some rhythm, they have that top end talent, those difference makers like Blanco and Diego Valeri, and the experienced coach in Giovanni Savarese, that they can really make some noise. And they're a team I'm looking at. If they can keep this kind of performance up, they absolutely have a shot of winning this whole thing. Very, very good start for the Portland Timbers. I still like the Galaxy. I am a huge fan of Christian Pavon. I think they're going to at least make things interesting. So to get those 3 points, to hold on to that game when you really faced an onslaught, good for Portland. Very, very good performance. Very impressive. Final loser, referenced this a little bit before, Montreal Impact. There was just nothing going on. It was just rough to watch. And again, it's one game. I still think they can absolutely get out of this group and build on some things. I like what Thierry Henry's doing. I like this roster for the most part, but you don't have time now. This is a very quick turnaround thing. You can't build into a season like the Seattle Sounders do, which is part of the problem that they're now facing. And the downside of me picking them to win this tournament is you expect that they can figure this thing out quick enough to just get through the group stage. Toronto's just got to put things together and attack. It's not the end of the world. It's one game. But when you still got that matchup with Toronto coming, your other competition is DC. There's no Cincinnati in your group to go get a 3 points. With all due respect to Cincinnati, again, this is a pretty balanced group. Toronto's definitely the best team, but when you're battling for two and the Revolution get a 3 point edge on you, and DC picks up a point, and this is a longer term project for Montreal. I like where they're going, but to start that way, it was rough to watch, and now you got to go figure out how to get at least 3 points from your next two games. One of them's against Toronto, so it's not out of the question. It doesn't really change how I feel about their team, but you got to get going in a tournament like this. You got to get your feet under you and just start playing well so that you can survive and then get into your knockout stage where anything can happen, and a team like we see in MLS playoffs all the time just put together a run and get hot. Montreal's a team to me that can do that, but you got to get through the first part of this and keep yourself around to get into the knockout stage. So tough start for them. That's our look at what's happened in MLS's back tournament so far. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, as always, what's next? Looking ahead to the next couple days in the soccer universe. We'll be back. Welcome back to Touchline Talk. We are here for our final segment, which means we're going to look at what's next. Starting today, Chelsea, Norwich City. Norwich are officially relegated. And it's strange because at the beginning of this season, they put together a good stretch of performances where you were kind of wondering if, at least I was wondering, if they could be what Sheffield United turned out to be. Timu Pukki was scoring goals, and then it just all went downhill. They got to beat Manchester City, and they have been lifeless for months now. No surprise. They've been as good as relegated for a while, but it's now official. You go back, you regroup. They're probably going to lose a couple players, but the core of that team will stay intact. So they got a chance to come back up. It was not good enough from Daniel Farke's team. And so from Chelsea, again, you can't drop points here. Somebody is going to do something from the Man U Leicester perspective. If you want, and then you got, Chelsea still has to play Liverpool. If you want to get into the Champions League, you got to take care of business here this afternoon. Tonight, MLS, Orlando City, NYCFC. Orlando got that late winner from Nani to get 3 points in the debut of this tournament. NYCFC, tough loss against Philly. NYCFC's got to get some momentum going. Can they pick up their first win? I really like their chances here. I'm not sold on Orlando. But again, you get those 3 points, you get some momentum. Even if they get a draw, they'll be in really good shape. This is about NYCFC and whether NYCFC can make good on the belief of me and other people that they are serious contenders to win this tournament. They are one of the best teams in the league. They were the one seed in the Eastern Conference last year, but it just hasn't quite gone their way so far. But all it takes is one good performance, and I think you could really see a different team and see a serious threat that is one of the better teams in this league. It could turn very quickly for them. They just got to get some momentum going. And then the late game, Philadelphia Union, Inter Miami. For Philadelphia, especially with Orlando having to play NYCFC, assuming NYCFC gets at least a point from that and Philly beats Inter Miami, Philly sits atop Group A. I'm not sure this team is good enough from a talent perspective to actually go on and win this tournament. There are some people that are picking them. And they're definitely a top 4, top 6 team in the East. It wasn't a phenomenal performance against NYCFC, but it was good enough. They're fun to watch. They've got a young talent. They're very cohesive. They're probably going to get, they're starting to work some guys back from injuries. They're dangerous and a team to watch. And from Inter Miami, this is the kind of I could very much see this turning into a game where Inter Miami scores the first goal and Philadelphia rallies to get one, and then the question becomes what happens next. Because Inter Miami, as we talked about right after the Orlando game a week ago, Thursday, they have, in their short MLS history, have already proven they have a tendency to blow leads. And you look at what the Union did against the Red Bulls in the playoffs last year, they are really good late in games. They have a terrific sub in Olsinho, assuming he's good to go. He came off with an injury in game 1. To me, this is just very interesting from a sort of a directional what happened standpoint. That if Inter Miami can get it going and just hold on to a lead, or find a way to rally and win a game late themselves, then they can make some noise in this group. But if they are unable to put together a complete 90 minutes and either Philly gets an early goal or Philly takes control of the game late and they throw away another lead, they are really in danger of burying themselves in this group. Because Orlando already has 3 points, because NYCFC is the most talented team in this group, and because Philly's looking the best so far. It's, every time they play, we're going to learn more about them. This is not the complete version of their team. And, like I said before, this is not Atlanta. This is not LAFC. Don't expect them to come in and take the league by storm. But they are a good team that should be more than capable of competing in this group. And they were, absolutely competitive with Orlando, but can you go from being good for 60, 75 minutes to being good for 90? That's the question for Inter Miami. That's what we're gonna find out. I think Philly poses a nice challenge for them to see where they're at. And then we go to Wednesday, Manchester City, Bournemouth. Manchester City revitalized and inspired by their newfound Champions League place for next season that we talked about earlier in the show. And Bournemouth, I mean, hey, can they somehow do this and win this game that has no meaning for Manchester City whatsoever and find a way to really make this relegation race interesting? Or are they going to get whacked because they're still not good defensively, and then you're asking a lot over those last couple games if they're going to save themselves? It's at least interesting. This is the kind of game that Bournemouth has been able to compete in historically since they've gotten promoted under Eddie Howe. But this is the different Bournemouth than we've seen in past years. So we'll see what kind of boost they get from the come from behind 4-1 thumping they gave Leicester. Arsenal-Liverpool. Arsenal coming off a tough North London derby loss where they were the better team, just couldn't put the passes together, couldn't finish except for Lacazette's terrific strike, but just couldn't do enough. Spurs hung around and did Jose Mourinho things. How do you respond from that? And Liverpool, in order to break this record, to have the most points in a Premier League season ever, they got to win all 3 games. They put themselves in a tougher situation than I thought they would. But at the same time, it's, when you're coming out of a multi-month break and just the weird stuff happening in the world right now, the goal is always, number one, was to win the league. They did that. They didn't, come out of the restart and just fall apart. But they clearly have not been the same team that they were for most of the season. So this is a fascinating challenge, Can they beat an Arsenal that's sort of revitalized, playing much better, to keep this hope alive of finishing with 100 plus points and being statistically the most impressive, best single season team in Premier League history? That's what they've got to play for, and as we talked about when they won the league, it matters because they just haven't won enough else. It's not like they're talking about a treble or being invincible or something like that. They were bowed out of the FA Cup, bowed out of the Champions League. This is the one thing they have left to play for in terms of the legacy of this team that's been so good all season. We can talk about, the impact that COVID's had and all of that, but at the end of the day, this is the one thing they have left. They should absolutely be up for it. Jurgen Klopp knows this is important, I think. So, very interesting to see what happens there. And then MLS, Vancouver, San Jose. San Jose is pressing like crazy, as they always do under Matias Almeida. They did a good job really bothering Seattle in game 1. It'll be interesting to see what can they muster in game 2. Vancouver lost a significant amount of players, and not only players, but important ones, particularly in attack. Marc Dos Santos does not have an impressive squad right now, so I'm not expecting much from them. San Jose is looking at this a very good chance to get 3 points and to really put themselves in a good position to get into the knockout stage. We'll see. Maybe Vancouver surprises people, but to me this is very much San Jose's game to lose. The other thing I wanted to mention before we close here, we're going to get into this more with our What's Next preview on Thursday, but the NWSL group stage, or whatever you want to call it, has ended, so we do have a bracket. North Carolina is the 1 seed, to the surprise of absolutely nobody. They're playing the Portland Thorns, which is a fascinating development, and it's going to be a really good game to watch. Washington Spirit got the 2 seed. They play number 7 Sky Blue, who lost the crazy tiebreaker with all these teams that had the same number of points. Just go look at the table. It's jam-packed in the middle like it was before this last set of games, it didn't do much to clean it up. So Sky Blue is on the losing end of that. They're the 7 seed. 3 seed OL Reign play 6 Chicago Red Stars. Another team, the idea of Chicago being 6 and Portland being 8 is quite shocking. But now you just regroup and you're in a knockout stage. Anything can happen. And then the 4 versus 5 is Houston Dash Utah Royals. So North Carolina Portland plays the winner of Houston Utah. Winner of Washington Sky Blue plays the winner of OL Reign Chicago. We'll get into a more in-depth preview of some of these games on Thursday because they don't play until the end of the week. But I did want to mention that the last couple games have been played over these Sunday and Monday. So we do have a bracket. We know who's playing who in the quarterfinals of the NWSL Challenge Cup. Of course, always more soccer going on, both here domestically and in Europe. I still am trying to process what happened this weekend. That was unreal on so many different levels. And then you throw in Manchester City getting that ban overturned. It's going to be a great end to the Premier League season, which is phenomenal because, we haven't had a title race. But the other 2 things you can talk about, relegation and the top 4. And we're going to get a phenomenal finish, at least in the top 4, and maybe relegation too. So, considering the circumstances, got to be very, very grateful of how things are shaking up in the Premier League. It's going to be a great finish. That's all we have for today. Chris Brown will be right here with Around the Bases at 1 p.m. Josh Molnooks will be back with the JMO Show tomorrow at 11 Eastern. We now have a newsletter for 110 Sports. You should go subscribe to that. We'll recap sort of our week every Friday, all the things that you need to know, the content we've put out. Thank you for watching. That's all for today, and we will see you Thursday.